The spreadsheet had been sitting open on my second monitor for 11 days. I kept coming back to it the way you keep pressing a bruise, not because it feels good, but because you need to confirm the damage is real. In my line of work, numbers don't lie. People lie. People forge signatures and backdate documents and move money through shell accounts and tell their families everything is fine. I audit estate finances for a living. I have sat across from grieving widows and explained to them, gently, that their late husband's business partner had been skimming for 6 years. I have watched grown men cry when I showed them the printouts. I know what financial betrayal looks like. I have seen it so many times that it stopped surprising me. What surprised me was finding it in my own family. My grandfather died on a Tuesday in October. He was 81 years old, sharp until the very end, the kind of man who did the crossword in pen and argued with the evening news and remembered every birthday without a calendar. He built a small manufacturing company from nothing in the 1980s, sold it in 2019 for just over $2 million, and spent his last years in the house he'd owned since my mother was a child. He was the only person in my family who ever looked at me like I was worth something. Like the fact that I had a career and a brain and a life I had built by myself was something to be proud of, not something threatening. He left me $420,000 and a 40% stake in a commercial property he'd purchased as an investment. I know this because he told me himself, 2 months before he died. We were sitting on his back porch, and he had a glass of sweet tea and he said, "Nora, I need you to know what I'm doing and why I'm doing it." He walked me through every number. He said, "You are the only one who will actually protect what I built." I didn't tell my mother or my brother what he said. I didn't think I needed to. My grandfather died on a Tuesday, and by Friday my brother had already started referring to the estate as our situation. My brother is 36. He has held 11 jobs in the past decade, none of them for longer than 18 months, most of them ending in what he describes as personality conflicts, and what his former employers likely describe as performance issues. My mother has spent the better part of 30 years rearranging reality to accommodate him. When he failed out of his first college, she told everyone he'd transferred. When he lost his real estate license the first time for a paperwork violation, she told everyone it was a clerical error, and the state had apologized. When he borrowed $40,000 from my grandfather 3 years ago and never paid it back, she told me it was a gift, and that I was being uncharitable for mentioning it. My mother is not a stupid woman. She is a woman who made a choice a long time ago about which child she was going to invest in, and she has been protecting that investment ever since. Facts be damned. I noticed the first discrepancy 9 days after the funeral. My grandfather's attorney had provided me with a preliminary copy of the estate inventory, as was my right as a named beneficiary. I was reviewing it the way I review everything methodically, column by column, and I found a line item that didn't match my records. A brokerage account I knew my grandfather had held since 2017 was listed at just under $60,000. The last statement he had shown me, 8 weeks before he died, had reflected a balance of $212,000. I did not call my mother. I did not call my brother. I poured myself a glass of water, sat back down at my desk, and opened a new spreadsheet. By the end of that week, I had found 4 more discrepancies. By the end of the following week, I had a very clear picture of what had happened. My brother had been given limited power of attorney over my grandfather's financial accounts 18 months earlier, ostensibly to help him manage bills while his health was declining. In those 18 months, approximately $300,000 had moved out of accounts my grandfather held and into accounts I could not immediately trace. The commercial property had been quietly refinanced, and there was a document referenced in an email chain I obtained through the attorney's office as part of the estate discovery process that I had never seen before. A document dated 6 weeks before my grandfather died, purportedly signed by him, that redirected my inheritance to a family trust, controlled jointly by my mother and my brother. I have seen forged documents. I have testified in 2 court cases involving estate fraud. I know the tells. The signature pressure inconsistencies, the font rendering artifacts that appear when a document is digitally altered and reprinted, the metadata that survives even when someone thinks they've scrubbed it. My grandfather had a very distinctive signature. He signed his name the same way for 60 years. I had birthday cards, letters, a handwritten note from 1987 that he'd kept in a box. I put the document on my lightbox and I looked at it for a long time. Then I called a probate attorney. Not the family attorney. Someone my grandfather had never met. Someone with no relationship to anyone involved. I explained what I had found. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "This is not subtle. We spent the next 2 weeks building a file." I provided her with every document I had. She subpoenaed bank records. We obtained a forensic analysis of the signature in question from a certified document examiner. We identified 2 of the 4 accounts my brother had moved money into. One was in his name. One was in the name of an LLC he'd registered in Delaware 18 months ago. I want to be precise about my emotional state during this period, because I think it matters. I was not falling apart. I was furious in the way that a very cold fire is furious contained. Efficient. Burning without wasting heat. My grandfather had trusted me to protect what he built. He had told me directly, with his own voice, that he believed I was the only one capable of doing it. I was not going to grieve and collapse and let them win because I was too emotional to function. The grief was real. I cried exactly once, alone in my car in a parking garage, and then I put it away and went back to work. On a Thursday morning in November, my mother called me. She said there was a family matter that needed to be addressed in person, and she needed me to come to the house that weekend. She used the voice she uses when she has already decided how something is going to go, the smooth, warm, slightly patronizing tone that I grew up understanding meant compliance was expected. I said, of course. I'll be there Sunday afternoon. She said, wonderful. I already knew what Sunday was going to be. I had known for a week. My attorney had received a copy of the document they intended to present to me, a formal renunciation of my inheritance, packaged as a family agreement for estate simplification. They wanted my signature. Once I signed, the probate court would record the renunciation, and the assets would flow into the trust they controlled. Clean, legal, and almost impossible to reverse. I made some preparations. Sunday came. I drove to my mother's house, which is the house I grew up in, a 4-bedroom colonial in a suburb that peaked in 1994. My brother's truck was in the driveway. There was a second car I didn't recognize parked along the curb, a gray sedan, engine off, someone sitting in the driver's seat. I noted it. I parked, gathered my bag, and walked to the door. My mother answered before I knocked. She was wearing her good blouse, which told me this had been treated as an occasion. She hugged me and said she was so glad I came, and I hugged her back and said I was glad too. My brother was at the kitchen table. He'd printed something and placed it in a manila folder in front of the chair that was clearly meant for me. He had the slightly electric energy of someone who has been rehearsing. My mother poured coffee. My brother said, "Why don't we all sit down?" I sat. I set my bag on the floor beside my chair. I folded my hands on the table. My brother opened the folder and slid the document toward me. He said, "Grandpa's estate is complicated, and we all want this to move forward smoothly, and the cleanest way to do that is to consolidate everything into one trust so it can be managed properly." He said that this was what Grandpa had ultimately wanted, based on conversations they'd had in his final months. He said that I would still benefit from the trust as a family member. He said it was really just a formality. I looked at the document. I looked at my brother. I said, "What conversations?" My brother said Grandpa had been very concerned about the tax implications of distributing assets individually, and that he'd discussed with their attorney the advantages of consolidation. I said, "Which attorney?" My mother said, "Nora. This is what the family needs. This is what Grandpa wanted." I said, "I'd like to understand the document before I sign anything." "That's not an unreasonable request." My brother's jaw shifted. He said, "We've already had it reviewed. It's straightforward." I said, "I have my own attorney, and I'd like her to look at it." The temperature in the room dropped about 10 degrees. My mother set down her coffee cup. My brother leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. And when he looked back at me, his expression had changed. He said, "Nora, we really need to get this done today." I said, "Why today?" He said there were deadlines. Probate timelines. He said the estate attorney had flagged that delays could create complications. I said, "What complications?" My mother said, "Nora, you are making this harder than it needs to be." I said, "I'm asking questions about a legal document that you want me to sign." "That's what you do before signing legal documents." My brother stood up. He walked to the kitchen doorway and then he came back and he put both hands on the table and he looked at me and he said, "We need you to sign this today." I looked at him. I said, "I'm not going to sign it today." What happened next took about 15 seconds and changed everything. My mother went to the front door and turned the deadbolt. My brother said, "You're not leaving until this is handled." He said it with the flat, certain tone of someone who has never had consequences, who has spent his entire life in a world rearranged to accommodate his needs, and who had simply never encountered a situation he couldn't push through by escalating. My mother said, "We are not trying to hurt you. We are trying to protect the family." She said that if I left without signing, they were going to have to make some calls. She said she was worried about my mental state. She said that the grief had clearly affected me, and that it might be necessary to have someone come and do a wellness check. There it was. That was the 5,150 threat. That was the move. Get me committed on a psychiatric hold, or at least create the appearance of instability, and anything I said out afterward would be filtered through the narrative that I was not well. I sat very still for a moment. Then I said, "Okay." My brother blinked. My mother's shoulders dropped slightly. I said, "You're right that I've been under a lot of stress." I said that I wanted to understand the document before I signed, but that if they needed it done today, I was willing to work through it together. I said I was sorry for being difficult. My mother came around the table and put her hand on my shoulder and said she knew this was hard, and that it would all be fine once we got through it. I pulled the document toward me. I looked at it. I asked my brother to walk me through the trust structure. Who were the trustees? What were the distribution terms? How were decisions made? He answered. He was visibly relaxing. My mother refreshed my coffee. My brother sat back down. I asked about the commercial property. I asked how the refinancing had been handled. I watched my brother's face when I said refinancing, and I saw the flicker, the half-second recalibration, the quick decision about how much I knew. He said the refinancing had been a routine financial management decision. I said, when was it executed? He said, I'd have to check the exact date. I said, was it before or after Grandpa's diagnosis? My mother said, Nora. I said, I'm just asking. My brother said, I don't see how that's relevant to what we're doing today. I said, I think it might be relevant to what we're doing today. Nobody spoke for about 4 seconds. Then I picked up the pen. I looked at the signature line. I looked at the date line. I turned to the second page. And the third. I got to the notarization block at the end, and I set the pen down. I said, this document was prepared by an attorney. Which attorney? My brother gave a name. It was not the family estate attorney. It was a name I had seen before in the LLC filing from Delaware, the same attorney who had helped my brother register the company 18 months ago. I set the pen on the table. I did not pick it up again. I said, I need to tell you both something. My mother said, Nora, please just. I said, please let me finish. I opened my bag. I took out a folder. Inside the folder were 37 pages of documents. I placed them on the table, between my brother and my mother. I said, 2 weeks ago, a certified forensic document examiner analyzed the signature on the instrument you're using to redirect my inheritance. His conclusion is that the signature is not consistent with my grandfather's authentic signature across 72 reference samples collected over 6 decades. He has put that in writing, and it is already on file with the probate court. My mother's mouth opened. I said, the bank records showing the transfer of approximately $300,000 out of my grandfather's accounts during the period of your power of attorney are also on file. The account those funds moved to the Delaware LLC has been identified. The forensic audit is ongoing, but the preliminary findings have been submitted. My brother said, you can't. I said, I'm not finished. I said, the conversation we've been having for the past 45 minutes has been recorded. The recording device is in this bag. The recording is being transmitted in real time to a secure server maintained by my attorney's office. Everything said in this room since I arrived, including the statement that I would not be permitted to leave, and the threat to initiate a false psychiatric welfare report, is on record. The room was completely silent. I said, the man sitting in the gray sedan outside is a process server. He has been waiting for my text. My attorney is prepared to file an emergency motion to freeze the estate assets, pending fraud investigation. That motion has already been drafted. It will be filed tomorrow morning whether I text him or not. My brother's face had gone a particular shade that I recognized from our childhood, the color he turned when he realized the story he'd been telling wasn't going to hold. When he was 12 and he'd broken something and tried to blame me and our parents had believed him right up until the moment they didn't. He turned that color now. My mother said quietly, Nora, this is your family. I said, I know. She said, your grandfather wouldn't have wanted this. I looked at her for a moment. I thought about the man on the porch with the sweet tea, who had told me I was the only one who would protect what he built. I thought about the file he had given his estate attorney, the legitimate estate attorney, not the one on the Delaware LLC in a sealed envelope, with instructions that it be given to me privately after his death. I had opened it 3 weeks ago. Inside was a single typed page with a note in his handwriting at the bottom. The note said, I know this is coming. I'm sorry I couldn't stop it before I go. You know what to do. I said, I think he would have wanted exactly this. I texted the process server 2 words. Go ahead. Through the window, I watched him get out of the car. I stood up. I picked up my bag. I walked to the front door, and I turned the deadbolt myself, and I opened the door, and I walked outside into the November air. My mother did not follow me. My brother did not follow me. The process server passed me on the front walk and I nodded back, and I got in my car and I sat there for a minute with my hands on the wheel. I had not eaten since 6 that morning. I was shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the particular adrenaline of a long-planned operation finally executing. I drove to a diner 3 miles away and ordered eggs and coffee, and I sat in a booth by the window and I let myself feel, for the first time in 6 weeks, something that was adjacent to relief. The emergency motion was filed the following morning. The estate assets were frozen within 48 hours. The probate fraud investigation was formally opened 11 days later. The document examiner's testimony was entered into the court record. The bank records were subpoenaed in their entirety. My brother hired an attorney. The attorney, once he reviewed the actual evidence, apparently had a very direct conversation with his client about realistic outcomes. My brother counterfiled exactly nothing. There was nothing to file. My mother called me twice in the first week. I did not answer. She left voicemails. They began with anger, words like betrayal and family and shame, and the second one ended with something that might have been crying. I listened to both of them once, and then I saved them to the same secure server where the Sunday recording was stored, because my attorney advised me to keep everything, and then I went back to work. The probate court issued its ruling 4 months after my grandfather died. The forged document was voided. The redirected trust was dissolved. The $420,000 was released to me along with the 40% stake in the commercial property. The court also found that the funds moved through the Delaware LLC during the period of the power of attorney constituted a breach of fiduciary duty, and my brother was ordered to return $280,000 to the estate money, which, when combined with what remained in the LLC account, would take him several years and a payment plan to resolve. His real estate license, which he had gotten reinstated 2 years prior, was suspended pending the ethics investigation. The gray sedan was not the end of it, as it turned out. The full forensic audit, completed 6 weeks after the court ruling, revealed that the $300,000 in missing account funds was not the only irregularity. Over the previous 4 years, my brother had submitted reimbursement requests to my grandfather, framed as assistance with property maintenance, estate management, various errands totaling just over $60,000 more than was legitimately owed. My grandfather, who had trusted his grandson and whose vision was not what it had been, had signed the checks. The audit couldn't prove my mother knew about every transaction, but it could prove she knew about some of them, and the civil suit was amended accordingly. I settled the civil portion 14 months after my grandfather's funeral. The number was appropriate. I won't share the exact figure, but I will say that between the estate recovery, the civil settlement, and the commercial property, which, once the fraudulent refinancing was unwound, was worth considerably more than I had originally understood, I walked away from the entire ordeal having protected exactly what my grandfather told me to protect. The commercial property is managed now by a firm I hired. The space is leased to 3 small businesses. One of them is a bakery. On the last Friday of every month, the baker leaves a box of pastries in the property management office with a note that says thank you. I do not know if she knows who owns the building. I like that she doesn't. I used a portion of the estate funds to set up a small scholarship at my grandfather's alma mater, a state school in Ohio, engineering program, first-generation students. It's not large. It funds 1 student per year, but my grandfather was a first-generation student, and he became an engineer, and he built something from nothing, and I wanted there to be a record of that somewhere that didn't depend on anyone else telling the story correctly. People sometimes ask me, colleagues, friends who know parts of what happened, whether I feel guilty, whether cutting off my mother and brother was the right choice, whether family is supposed to come first, or forgive, or find a way through. I always think before I answer, because I think the question deserves that. And then I say, my grandfather came first. Everything he spent his life building came first. The people who tried to steal it from him while he was dying do not get to invoke family as a shield after the fact. Family is not a blank check. It is not a license. It is something you earn and then maintain by the way you treat the people who trust you. My grandfather trusted me. I did not let him down. I still have the note from the sealed envelope, the typed page with his handwriting at the bottom. I framed it. It hangs in the hallway of my apartment, between the window and the door, so I see it every time I leave. It says, I know this is coming. I'm sorry I couldn't stop it before I go. You know what to do. He was right. I did.